Good afternoon. Welcome to the 7th session of this conference on the fear of art. The session is on censorship and self-exile. And the moderator for this session is Jacob Orsos, who is directs the World Voices Festival and public programs at PEN America. Center, just planning the festival for this spring. Before coming to the United States in, I think, 2005, is that right? He had a very busy and flourishing career in Hungary, where he founded a literary journal and hosted many different kinds of cultural programs. And it's now my great pleasure to give him the great pleasure of introducing the panelists for this session.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jakab Orsos. As you heard, I'm Hungarian, hence my accent. So hopefully I can project what I want to project. Can you? Oh, God. So is it better now? Yeah. All right. So this is really my great pleasure to introduce our two panelists here, Shireen Nashat and Jack Perkessian. Shireen, as you may know, is one of the most important and most interesting, which it doesn't always come together, Persian artist living in New York for more than 2 decades, as far as I know. She started as a photographer and then actually exhibited an absolutely groundbreaking, substantial series of works until when she started to do video installations in the late 90s. After that, she switched to feature films, which I've seen one of them featuring actually a Hungarian actress, remember? And working at the Venice Biennale, in fact, winning the main prize at the 1999 Venice Biennale. So it's a rich, very inspiring career here, and we're actually lucky and happy to have Shireen to share her thoughts with us. Jack Perkessian. Jack is actually gonna face a very interesting challenge soon. He's knee-high already in founding, getting ready, and finally opening the Palestinian Museum, which in itself is a huge task, and I'm sure that we're gonna hear about. Before, Jack had a gallery in Jerusalem, and more importantly, and we're also gonna frame this and talk about this, he was the head curator, the director of the Sharjah Biennial, which when was the date for the infamous act? In 2011, he was asked to leave the job overnight. So we'll speak about that, what was the reason for that, and how he sees it now. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Shireen and Jack.
It's a great honor to be here. Thank you very much. I prepared something, and I wrote a text for this session, and I'm also sitting on the next session, so I also have another text for the next session. But from being here yesterday, and especially hearing what Ai Weiwei said, being touched, empowered, I thought maybe I'll try to put things in context. I'll try to talk about the situation. Of course, this session is primarily on exile, self-exile. So from what I heard yesterday, I wanted to kind of bring about a very particular situation that I'm facing in Jerusalem, being from Jerusalem, having been born there and living there most of my life. I want to put just the audience in the context of the place that we live in and somehow reflect on a certain feeling. It's a feeling exile in one's own country or hometown. Maybe you can put up the map, please. Everybody knows a little bit about the history of that place, so I'm just gonna fly through it very quickly. When 1948, when the Nakba, the catastrophe, took place and Palestinians were expelled out of the country and Israel was established, the armistice line was drawn, and maybe you can lower the light a little bit here so people can see the colors. So the armistice line is the green line. I just took this up from the internet just right before this session. It's from the B'Tselem Human Rights Organization, so it's on the website, you can find it. So they drew the line between, eventually, for those of us in Jerusalem, for what became East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. So I'll go up to the map and show you. This is the green line. And so this part, you want me to speak on this microphone? Yes. So this part became West Jerusalem, and this part became East Jerusalem. But in 1967, when Israel annexed the east part of Jerusalem, and of course the West Bank, what became to be the West Bank, because the West Bank was a name that was given to that part of the world by the Jordanian king. He decided that this is not Palestine, this is the West Bank of the River Jordan. That's where the name came. Anyway, it's not our issue today. When Israel annexed East Jerusalem, the planners thought that, well, what do we do with this new city, this unified capital unified eternal capital of the state of Israel? What do we do with it? You know, half of it is on the west side, and half of it is the east side. And if we look at the demography, it's almost equal. It doesn't work. The demography in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, has to be, at the maximum, 20% non-Jews, 80% Jews. So the planners decided to draw the boundaries of Jerusalem, which they called Greater Jerusalem. And if you follow the yellow line, that goes all the way up to Ramallah, as you see now, and it goes all the way down here. So this great expansion on this side means that they can build as much as they want, and they can settle people as much as they want. On the east side of Jerusalem, it kind of played a kind of almost like a serpentine path. It took a serpentine path where wherever the brown areas, according to this map, is the built-up area of Palestinian communities. So it tried to kind of have them outside this this imaginary boundary that they created. And then, at that time, of course, in real life, living there, you don't see these lines. But in terms of law and in terms of things happening on the ground, they've enacted a law that says whoever does not live inside Israel, proper Israel, which is, as in the case of Jerusalem, inside this yellow line, does not have the right to be in Jerusalem. And how does this apply to Palestinians? Because Palestinians are not citizens of the state. Palestinians are residents or permanent residents of the state, just like green card holders in this country. So anybody who has this green card, but who, of course, has been born there, his parents have been born there, lives outside this yellow line, will eventually lose this right of, being in Jerusalem. Another law was to create what is called the green areas, green zones. So what was done in the east part, particularly of Jerusalem, was to kind of start designating areas, I'm talking since 1967 now, as areas that you now see them in blue, but then at that time as green areas, areas where people cannot build. And they've enacted very strict laws for construction, which drove people outside the populated area within East Jerusalem into these areas that were outside the city parameter. Of course, people didn't know then that that was the case. Now we know. And how do we know this? Because if you follow the red line now, this is the wall. And the dotted line is the planned expansion of the wall, the separation wall. So eventually, after 2000, they started constructing this red line, the wall, and put in place the law, enacted the law, and so whoever lives outside this wall has no right to come in. What does this mean to somebody like me who's living inside here? It means that anybody I'm working with who lives outside this boundary, meaning all the people living in Palestine, cannot come physically and cannot be here in this part. So for those of us, the few of us who are still living in this part of the country, in East Jerusalem, feel like as if we're living in an island. We're totally disconnected from our constituency. So whatever program or project we're trying to do, be it through the gallery or the foundation, the Al-Ma'amal Foundation, or whatever, does not connect with our audience or the audience that we try to reach. Not to mention, of course, the artists, the impossibility for artists to come, for impossibility of bringing in artwork and exhibiting it, the impossibility to connect with Gaza, the impossibility to connect with any other artist who not only lives in Palestine, but who can be living in Egypt, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in any Arab country, for the very simple reason that they actually carry the wrong passport, a passport that doesn't allow them to come to this place. So it is, in essence, for somebody like me living here, a feeling of exile, feeling of one being in their own hometown, in their own country, but totally disconnected from the people he works with, the people he enjoys a conversation with, the people who one would try to hopefully develop something in the future. Somebody like Shireen, for example, in that particular context. So this is, I thought of bringing this up, especially after I heard Iway, just to kind of put things in context. I can go on and talk about the Palestinian Museum project and talk about Sharjah if you wish, but I think this is very, very important to kind of at least inform people of what it means. Of course, it's much more complicated. It's much more, it goes into the details of the daily life, of where you go, how you drive from one place or another, what kind of ID you carry, etc. It's a very long story, but I just think that this is good enough now for a conversation starter. Thank you.
Okay. I also want to say how grateful that I am to be here. Thank you, Arian and Jacob, for inviting me. I never usually read anything, but I saw yesterday everybody was reading, so I tried to do the same thing. And now I see he's not reading, so my apologies. I wanted to say, since yesterday, with the theme of this conference being the fear of art, we've been hearing a lot about various subjects around art in relation to politics, censorship, activism, artists at risk, artists in exile, artist potency, etc. I'm here today, obviously, not as an expert or an activist, but as an artist, and will be happy to share with you my own experiences and perspectives as an Iranian artist whose work has perpetually tackled political issues, and as an artist who has chosen a life in exile. I would like to use the example of the Iranian culture and how it has developed and transformed ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution as the basis of my presentation. Let's first agree that no governments in the world could compare with the Iranian and perhaps the Chinese government when it comes to the brutal and oppressive treatment of artists and intellectuals. I myself would have never chosen a life in exile had it not been for the horrendous political nature of my country. But still, I like to complicate things a bit and argue that perhaps this conference premise draws too easy of a line in between the good and bad. And in my opinion, the situation is far more complicated and not as black and white. For that purpose, I would like to explore the problematic of how by Western publics supporting and rallying around artists who put themselves at risk and courageous in the face of tyranny, we also tend to risk constructing cultures that are limited and based less on artistic merits, but more feeding Western expectation and curiosities when it comes to social, political, and religious issues of non-Western and politically volatile cultures. I know I may be disappointing many here in this room, since one can argue that the very foundation and success of my own career has been based on the political nature of my work, more specifically my exploration of Islam in relation to feminism, mysticism, political ideology, violence, and oppression. I myself, a number of times, have openly and publicly spoken about how ever since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, when the Iranian image declined from a rich, ancient culture of poets and mystics to barbaric land of fanatics and mullahs, Iranian artists have unquestionably been the saving grace of our nation, despite the lack of freedom of expression and tremendously oppressive cultural environment. But I look at the Iranian society today and I'm beginning to see a totally different reality. I see a deeply divided society. On one hand, we have seen the birth of the most subversive, minimal, and metaphorically powerful cultural offerings for filmmakers, by filmmakers, artists, writers, theater directors, musicians, and others who have succeeded to flourish into the world despite censorship. Yet we are faced with a new predicament that on the international level, the Iranian creative community is only taken seriously and supported by institutions and the public as long as their stories and their concepts somehow chooses to condemn tyranny, social injustice, and other forms of social political readings, reiterating the oppressive nature of their country. Let me use the example of the Iranian cinema and how it has been in transitions ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. For the first few decades, we saw the most imaginative, minimal, and humanistic cinematic language, which, while observing the codes, beautifully expressed the plight of the Iranian society. Filmmakers such as Abbas Kiarostami, Mohsen Makhmalbaf, Ja'far Panahi, Bahman Qobadi pioneered a new genre that quickly discovered and cherished, that was quickly discovered and cherished by the Western institutions, film festivals, and distributors, receiving an unprecedented public attention. But slowly, the Iranian government became savvy and smart and recognized the subversive nature of these films, so it began to tighten the regulation, banned screening of the films, and stopped the film productions. That forced many filmmakers, such as Bahman Qobadi and Makhmalbaf, to choose life in exile and permanently leave their Iran in fear of further sanctions, while others like Kiarostami continued to live in Iran but began to make their films in foreign countries. The 2009 Green Movement led to major cultural transformation and a breaking point for many Iranian artists and intellectuals. Creative community became for the first time divided in between those who chose to be silent and those who became vocal and active in supporting the pro-democracy movement. Many filmmakers, such as Kiarostami, remained neutral and stayed away from politics or political activity, while others, such as Ja'far Panahi, went to the extreme measure to support the Green Movement. Panahi was later arrested in March of 2010 and later charged with propaganda against the Iranian government, despite support from filmmakers, film organizations, and human rights organizations from around the world. In December 2010, Panahi was sentenced to 6 years jail sentence and 20 years ban on directing any movies, writing screenplays, giving any form of interviews with Iranian or foreign media, or from leaving the country. But he was later released, but still unable to leave the country. But ironically, as we speak today, Panahi's latest offering, his latest film called Taxi, is showing at the competition in Berlin Film Festival. Being there just a few days ago, I saw his film is one of the most talked about films in the festival. Everyone is amazed in how, with the smallest budget, all contained in a taxi, he could tell such a powerful story that once again gives a glimpse into the Iranian society. But the question remains for many Iranians as the following. How did he manage to make the film if he was forbidden from working? How did he get the film out? And why is the Iranian government so quiet about the public showing of his film? Is the interest of the international community the audience toward the quality of his film, or the magic of how he made his film and got it out of the country? In fact, we Iranians compare often Panahi's personal and professional trajectory with that of Ai Weiwei, and how their arrest, imprisonment, political dilemma, ironically, has turned them into instant stars, and more successful than ever before. Then I'd like you to consider an entire new generation of artists born after the Islamic Revolution. I believe this is a generation who has only lived through an oppressive environment and feels an emotional, psychological, and artistic exhaustion from political subjects. Therefore, they choose to turn their back toward socio-political narratives and consequently receive no interest or support from Western institutions or audience. Clearly, we're beginning to see that the Western culture discriminates artistic expression once it comes to politically volatile countries. In fact, more and more Western art galleries, film festivals, publishers are only interested in Iranian artistic expressions that somehow are expressive of the oppressive nature of Iran. While cheap memoirs are written by young people who have hardly lived long enough to write a memoir of their experiences get published, some of our most accomplished writers worthy of Nobel Prize fail to penetrate through the Western culture. Conclusion is, how guilty is the Western culture in manipulating, reducing non-Western cultures to what they desire to see? And is artists' act of moving away from political art, if they're in fact born within politically volatile environment, a form of self-censorship or escape, or possibly a form of artistic freedom to embrace more existential issues that all Western artists enjoy? I leave the answers to you, and possibly for the discussion. But to leave you with short remarks about my own experiences living in the state of self-exile. Well, it has its pluses and minuses. While I'm free from censorship and harassment, but I'm deprived from visiting my home and family, obviously. I'm caught in between my own personal and emotional dilemma versus constantly having the duty and obligation to be a translator in between cultures that are not just different, but in total conflict. While living outside, free of any form of censorship, having lived years under dictatorship, I've subconsciously come to function within certain forms of visual and conceptual boundaries, which are totally foreign and unnecessary to the Western eyes and critics. Very often, my allegorical, metaphorical language has been misunderstood, as the Western critics don't understand the need to having to beat around the bush so much. Finally, although living in exile in the West, I have never had the desire to point fingers or to disrespect any form of political or religious ideology, even if in principle they're against my own principles and personal choices. Could this be interpreted as a form of self-censorship? I'm not sure, but it could very well be due to my non-Western cultural background. Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. Thank you, Jack. was absolutely inspiring. Let's just start with this. Shireen has raised this toward the end of her speech, as well as Jack. Who is your audience if you feel logged in to East Jerusalem and you feel logged into this role of speaking the language of the West or feeling the expectation from the West to fulfill their political interest? Who do you think is your audience for you and you? Let's start with Jack.
It's being there is a form of resistance. There was an attempt in the mid-90s when the Palestinian Authority was set up, and all the donor countries, after the signing of the Oslo Agreement was explicit about East Jerusalem, and it said that the Palestinian Authority cannot touch that place, cannot operate, cannot do anything, cannot work, cannot fund, cannot, service the people there. And the donor countries were complicit in terms of channeling all the funding to the PA, which set up base in Ramallah, in the West Bank, and started draining East Jerusalem, which historically was the center of life for Palestinians, was the de facto capital, because all the hospitals or the religious institutions, legal, banking, and everything was in East Jerusalem. So with the setup of the PA, everything was kind of somehow channeled to Ramallah. So in my case and the few people who are working there, it was a decision whether to kind of follow the herd and follow the money, which is going to be with the PA and in that context, or just stay in Jerusalem and decide that this is going to be our, kind of battle. And with time, it became a sort of battlefront, because then later, especially after the Second Intifada, people realized that there is a systematic cleansing of the Palestinian population in East Jerusalem. And so under then through the UN and under the context of, sadly, under the context of poverty alleviation and helping the dying population over there, some of the donor countries kind of somehow started coming back to East Jerusalem and started, seeing what can they do, how can they help the people, how can they, kind of maintain at least a basic level of survival over there. So to me, it's a very political issue, and it's a form of resistance and activism, being active. Yes, if you want to start counting like some, of course, because we live off funding that is coming from, donor institutions. If you want to kind of fall into the trap of starting to count, okay, how many people came through your doors this year? How many people saw the shows that you organize? How many people attended the conferences you do? It doesn't make sense, of course. Yeah. I cannot give them that. And that's why, I don't know if there's going to be a chance, that's why we came up with the idea in 2007 to start going out to the people. So we came up with the idea of the Jerusalem show, where the actual show and the artists work with the community in different locations in the city and somehow attract the audience as they pass by without, the necessity of coming to the actual place itself. So the audience at one level is the city and the people within the city through the different programs that we do, be it workshops, be it exhibitions, be it talks, be it whatever. But the audience on another level, on a more political activism level, is this public, and everybody who asks this question, or at least who pays attention to what we do, where we are, and how come we're there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little later. But let me ask Shireen about this. This is an absolutely substantial consideration what you just raised about the Western world and the West's expectations when it comes to your art or any in that matter, any artist coming from that part of the world, who do you think you speak to or you can speak to?
Well, I mean, my situation, it's very different than, let's say, Iranian artists living in Iran, because automatically I'm faced with multi-audience. Let's say as a Western artist, you're faced mainly with the art world. But the choice that I've made in terms of the work that I'm making and its politically charged material has brought me into another arena that I must take a lot of responsibility. And so therefore my critics, the people who consider my work are from the New York Times to the Islamic Republic of Iran, to the people who are considered, to the people who are here. So it's not possible to look at my work within one lens of audience. It has multiple audience, and therefore I have to be conscious of articulating my ideas in the consideration of multi-audience. In terms of the Iranian artists, and more and more I'm meeting them, there's a great frustration because many of them are really making fantastic work, whether in theater, music, film, visual arts, and the Iranian community is really supporting them completely. But no one is interested in the West. And this goes for literature as well. I've had many writers who have extremely talented that have never been able to convince a publisher, mainly because it doesn't appeal to a Western audience who perpetually are interested in that reiteration of that reductive image of the Iranians as those who, you know, are the victims, etc. And so if you're just making art for the sake of art, like many Westerners do, you're out of luck. And none of those make it to competition in Berlin or any of that. So this, my argument is that we have to make room for people who, even though they live in politically charged environments, don't have to necessarily make work that are valid because, you know. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but is it?
Absolutely. Now we are talking, in fact. So who is the censor here? So who is censoring who? When you are doing an exhibition, when you were putting together the fantastic Sharjah Biennial, there was this culminating point when you were censored. Shireen is sitting here next to me talking about the necessity of the broader sense of art, but who listens to that? There is a censorship here, what I feel, it's tangible. Who is responsible for that censorship? People with money, people with their money-driven curiosity, and who is here to readjust this unbalance, and how we can actually make that happen? Is there a way from your end to manipulate to a certain degree, or to actually send out signals that, hey, the political arena is maybe oversaturated? Can you sharpen your eyes and ears, your attention, to be able to listen to us, what we need to say? Is there any chance to do that? Or it's totally impossible, we are doomed, we are caged into this political narrative?
I cannot really answer this from a kind of a broad perspective. I can maybe kind of focus in or zoom in on the things that I experienced in my life and the things that I've dealt with in my life, if that would have any relevance on this discussion. But yeah, there are several things that you mentioned are absolutely, you know, part of the underlying or the lining that that somehow encase this whole notion of censorship. The money is definitely a big factor, and you've seen it here in the States several times, you know, with the Ophelia exhibition and other issues where institutions are put under the, under pressure, and they're forced to do things that they don't otherwise would do or subscribe to had they been totally free and not dependent on this source of funding. I mentioned the other day, we were in another conference, and I mentioned the project that I was involved with, because there's a lot of, for example, talk about Palestine, Israel, and both sides should speak together, and especially in the arts and culture. And this whole notion of boycott that now we're working and dealing with. And so I was just giving people an example about an event that took place in '97, when still the communications between both sides, I mean, Palestinian and Israeli, was still, okay, was still happening, yet on the political and the negotiation level, there were then many stumbling blocks, and there were many failures there. So there was this project that two women organizations in Jerusalem came up with, one Israeli and one Palestinian, and they titled this whole initiative as Sharing Jerusalem, Two Capitals for Two States. At that time, that idea was completely, novel. Nobody would consider that, especially on the Israeli side. The Palestinian side subscribed to that, and things started happening. I was put in charge of the culture program, and I've organized several exhibitions in East Jerusalem, several performances. Some of the exhibitions involved Israelis and Palestinians, which is something that is completely undone now. It's impossible to do that now. And yeah, things looked pretty promising in terms of this negotiation. Yet on the Israeli side, not a single event was organized, because of the fact that most of the institutions in East Jerusalem, who in principle are for a peaceful resolution, are for sharing the city, are for a two-state solution, but in practice, they couldn't, because they told us, well, sorry, this idea was not ratified by the government, so if we get implicated in this event, then the municipality will cut our funding, the government will cut our funding, so nothing happened. So it was an event that only took place in the east side of Jerusalem, nothing took place in West Jerusalem. So in essence, it was a total failure. Like most of the, the whole attempt, as you probably know very well, the negotiations and everything, it's all a failure, because it's always, like incomplete, and there are many reasons to kind of shoot these things down. Sharjah is a completely different context, of course. I'm not going to go into the details, but I can tell you that I was fired not only because, of one artwork, that somebody didn't like and sent these messages and got the sheikh to fire me. There were things that were directed at me personally. Those people who sent these messages asking the sheikh to fire me were sending them saying that fire Jack, not fire the curator, because I wasn't the curator. Rasha Salti was the curator, and she chose this work. And it so happened that I'm reading now in the list of the participants in the Sharjah Biennial this year, I see her name in the list. So she has no problem of being there, and they have no problem with her being there, having been the curator in that incident, and having had chosen that artist and that particular work, and having had, kind of written that petition that started circulating about, you either reinstitute Jack or, we're going to boycott you. And now she's part of the event. So I'm not going to go into that, but in the sense that my firing was not a direct consequence of an artwork and that artwork being censored. I mean, there were people who didn't like an outsider whose name is Jack, you know, working there for 7 years and having established something that they would have liked that somebody from there.
You see,
Do it.
this is an interesting phenomenon here. We're talking about art. Instead, what we are talking about, we're talking about politics. So, is there a chance, Shireen, to dig, and corruption, which walks hands in hand, being Hungarian now, I should be able to tell stories about this. But Shireen, is there any chance to really somehow get rid of the overwhelming political layer of art? And of course, I'm hopeful that there is a chance, but in your personal life and work, how can you see that the idea to come around this phenomenon, how you can trick the system?
Well, I wanted to, before I say that, I wanted to also respond to this question of censorship. Of course, I've not been able to show my work in my country. I've never had an exhibition or screening there. I'm banned from going to Iran. The only time I felt censorship was in New York at the Museum of Modern Art. And please don't repeat that to any of their staff. But I'll never have a show there. I mean, anyway, I remember it was soon after the controversy over the Danish cartoon, and there was a contemporary Islamic art exhibit, and after I participated, and I looked at the selection they made, the curator, who was Iranian, and the whole selection that they had made, I came to realize that they had carefully eliminated any work that was slightly political in their fear of upsetting their board of trustees and the public, because there was such an anti-Islam sentiment. And that, considering that political climate, to only show that a work that are purely aesthetically oriented and eliminate the possibility of a discourse, a dialogue, and completely eradicating any, like all of my images with the weapons, they were completely, you know, anything that was nothing to do with the revolution. Even some of the other artists, I remember Emily Jassir. And so I decided to speak up, and the fact that I spoke up, it was not received very well, and the curator never spoke to me again, and the idea was not to disrespect, but to question the premise of showing an exhibition of Islamic art without allowing it to have any political inclination, which was absurd at the time that we were living in. Now, anyway, that passed, and I'll probably never be in a show there again. But the question that you said, I think it's a very interesting question. How an artist such as myself, who's as much interested in making work that is emotionally effective, is poetic, it's timeless, in what it's trying to say, while it's historically based, it's political, and how can you balance affecting an audience that could be on both in both dimensions? And I think it ultimately goes back to the artist finding that form, finding that kind of expression that could find that balance, that you refuse to be reduced to only a discourse that can look at your work for its socio-political values and non-artistic and other ways. So I really think it goes back to the power of the artists and how they form their creative expression.
Which span between, as I understand you correctly, and we have to emphasize this here, starting from the point, from your point of view, when you mentioned that the West is over-politicizing, with their expectation, art coming from, let's say in this sense, from Iran, but also they are forbidding, at certain situations, they're also forbidding art with political connotations at certain instances. So the balance lays somewhere around artistic the freedom of artistic expression, and your the artist's freedom to say whenever they feel is suitable to the given situation. And the West and the audience, and we have to talk about this audience again, sometimes rigid, and they already have a preconceived notion what they want to hear and see. Am I right?
Yeah, maybe, but I also think that not from the point of view of an artist, because Shireen can, but from a point of view of an institution, the curators, of course the board, as we said, the money, we all play this one way or another a form of censorship, and we make selections. So by making a selection, you're already, kind of eliminating some of the work. So you go to Shireen's place, studio, and you say, I want this, this, and this, because this ties in with my argument or with my theme, with my concept. There, you've already exercised a sort of censorship. And then you're always in a position to consider audience. I need to eventually communicate my ideas to the audience. Does this work? Do that, or would this totally offend your audience? I'm going to bring up an example where I've exercised censorship, in the work that I'm doing, but I'll leave it to the next session. Is that okay?
What's the next session is about? So, Shireen, the title of the conference is interesting, Fear of the Art. You can't help but ask, who is afraid of art? We're talking about politicians, we're talking about any power, any government. Is that right? Are they really consider art as subversive and dangerous? Or are we just kind of like accustomed to this belief that subversive art can be dangerous? In what way? Do they really care? Isn't the concept of dangerous art suggest this oversaturated narrative that yes, subversive art he has to be dangerous? Is that right? Didn't the audience, in that matter, politicians, governments, got used to this idea and they already figured out how to handle us, you guys, us?
It's really, I'm finding that I'm changing a lot my position, and I'm coming from someone who in 2009, with the release of Women Without Men, during the Green Movement, I became very vocal and in support of the pro-democracy movement, and I really do believe as art, as culture, being a way to provoke and mobilize and inspire people in totally positive ways, and to really be a form of resistance against tyranny and culture. And people of power. But at the same time, I'm starting to see the other side of it in a way that, the government is also becoming very entertained by this, and it really puzzled many of us today. For example, as I mentioned, by Panahi's film, for the third film that he has produced since he's been banned from making films, and being in the festival, I was one of the jurors a few years ago. We gave him a prize. How the government is very silent. And in fact, many of us question, is the artist collaborating with the government? What is going on? And so there is this ambiguity in terms of the form of corruptions and manipulation that actually takes place by the artist. But in a way that we like to give this image of victimization, because in a way it helps our career. In a way it's become a formula. Those artists who are living in exile or they're suffering because of censorship, and their stories really informs us about the repression of the country, somehow become the heroes. And I find myself as someone who really supported the movement, and someone who's in exile and not able to go and make such a politically charged work, I'm bothered by that how we as artists, as institutions, can be a part of that form of manipulation. And is it really what, I don't have the answers, but for example, I think Berlin Film Festival for sure censored by choosing a film that they knew guarantee that will bring the audience, sell the tickets, and get a lot of critics' attention, where they brought a movie by an artist who made a film about love, about existential issues from Iran, had nothing to do with any issues that is currently happening in Iran. It just won't get the reception. I find that problematic. And I don't know how to respond to that. Are the artists guilty of purposely making art that is provocative in that way, that is successful? Or is this really truly what we have to say? Or are we being manipulated by the Western interest that perpetually wants to see us as a victim? These are questions that, again, it's just running through my head. And I can tell you one thing, I'm not the only one. There are a huge Iranian community that is really puzzled and frustrated by this. But both by the Western part of expanding on this, but also the artists themselves, you know, how they keep creating work of such nature.
Nothing else, this conference already was worth to organize because Shireen and Jack are raising really substantial issues here. I think the next step should be to do another conference to talk about the West and how we are actually kind of like twisting this image and forcing up our culture upon others people's belief and art. What can we do? Where is the subversiveness of art lays? Is there any room left here? If the situation is so distangled and so complicated that everyone plays a role in it, the artist, the government, critics, curators, festival directors, how you can actually go back to the drawing board and produce and present meaningful, strong, inspiring artwork. What does that really mean? Where is the subversiveness is hidden now? Where do you see the subversiveness?
Maybe in schools, maybe in art schools, and maybe in institutions that that can provide the means and that can provide the freedom for its faculty and students to do that. But I see more and more as one steps out into the kind of real life situation, when one has to deal, as you said, with a whole set of protagonists, you know, the gallerists, the institution, the museums, the auction houses, the collectors, the government, of course. You're completely tied into almost like a, what do you call that? Like a conveyor belt type of situation where you're just, a part of that production line, and you're stuck. And if you don't play the game and you don't, lower a little bit your ethical standing and allow things to pass, and as you say, twist your principles here and there in order to, get ahead, I don't think people can make it. And you see that more and more, you see that, you see the market. For example, if you look at the Middle East, and since I went to Sharjah, I could see that because I went to a period when things started booming at that time, everything, the real estate market, but also the art market and everything. And I could see how, the auction houses jumped in, not to mention, of course, the galleries and the museums from here and everywhere. And they started going directly to artists and commissioning them to do artwork that goes directly to auction, you know, which is very strange how the auction house becomes a producer and an auctioneer at the same time. And there are a zillion examples on this, and I'm sure most of you know and heard about it. But and so it's when you look at it, you see that it's polluted, it's contaminated, to say the least. And I still see that there is still some hope with some educational institutions. Some, not all of them. I don't know.
Shireen, what's your answer?
I mean, my general feeling is that an artist makes work in response to the life that they live in, and there has to be a sense of integrity and honesty in why they have certain obsessions. And my obsession with the Iranian Revolution and the question of political realities in Iran is all based on my personal experiences, and then later I realized that I was really blessed because I didn't approach art as a as a professional career strategy, but as a total accident and as a way of facing some of my own personal dilemmas. But I can see now that, you know, for artists who are living in places where the doors are closed to them, and this idea of possibility of success, exiting, making money, becoming famous, and there are these very quick remedies. For example, as he said, suddenly everybody is making art in the Middle East with calligraphy because the people like to buy it, or you know, certain political contents are very attractive. So as if a formula, you see a lot of Middle Eastern artists rushing to make politically charged work. It happens in film, in literature. So it's unfortunate that, you know, not all of us are, you know, like I feel like I was very blessed because, again, I had no plans of being an artist professionally. But for many people who approach it differently and really do want to climb the ladders, following the Western's interest is much better way of success and achieving the goal, as opposed to just having that integrity and honesty, saying, no, I'm not going to go with I'm going to go against the stream. And so I think that's the dilemma that the new generation of Iranians are facing, and I've really only opened my eyes to it recently, and that what are they supposed to do? If they want to ever leave Iran, if they want to have an audience, but they're not really interested in art of them, other than, you know, what they can say about the society. And what if they're not interested in? So it's really a dilemma. How do you go about articulating your expression as an artist and your response to the life that you live in without a consideration of what the world is expecting from you? In terms of markets, in terms of critical acclaim, and I feel it. I feel it, you know, and I do get angry for certain over-celebration of certain artists. I think we're overdoing it. I don't think they're guilty. Maybe they've become also fascinated by success and the stardom. I'm not sure. Being a celebrity, suddenly everybody who goes to prison and is arrested, we have a joke now that some artists say, I wish I could get arrested and go to prison for a while because then I can be famous. I mean, this is not a joke. There are a lot of people who feel that's the price to pay to. And I'm saying this very specifically, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it is the Western public. And I think we rarely, you know, listen to this point of view that let's also look at artists from that region that are politically volatile, but are not choosing to be dealing with the issues of freedom of expression, censorship, this and that, you know? And
it's not going to be an easy task on us. It's very important. I have the feeling that we have to recognize, after all, that we live, our lives is an organic structure and it changes, and we have to relearn ourselves and the nature of art. So what is that? What does the most important function of art is raising questions, political at certain moments, non-political at other times. So we have to be able to prepare as audience, as curators, as artists, to be able to address this ever-changing nature of our lives, art in our lives. And it's not an easy task. We have to work, and that's pretty much what we can actually do to make people understand that life is a constant work. We have to work to be able to understand, misunderstand, and readjust all the time. Questions from the audience? So the floor is open. There are two mics here.
Yeah, this side too.
Hold on for a sec. The gentleman was actually here first.
Is this working?
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about how in Iran the population is getting younger and younger and is also very well educated. I've heard that a high proportion of university students are women, which I think gives us great hope. I wonder if Shireen could tell us how much through word of mouth and social media banned work from exiles is reaching young people, and what else is going on in the lives of young people that will change society. And of course, young people must be a great hope in Palestine, so perhaps you would have something to say on that score too.
Again, I speak from a perspective of someone who doesn't ever go to Iran, but I have a very close connection to the Iranian community inside and outside, and my understanding is that the younger generation of Iranians are really well educated about Western culture in terms of literature, theater, cinema, art. They're really incredibly up to date. Sometimes I'm really blown away by also how fluid they are in terms of languages. This is remarkable for a country that has been closed for so many years and so few people can travel. So of course, due to the social media, they have had a lot of possibilities to be exposed. But my understanding is that the new generation of Iranian artists are really pioneering their own language, artistic language, that is at once authentic to Iran, yet informed about the Western world, and is sort of a really ingenious way of sort of balancing the many things. In fact, they're often very critical of Western art, but also the same as some of the things I mentioned, the more cliche kind of work that, including my own work sometimes, that are more favorable by, Western audience. So it's an extremely sophisticated generation of young people who are educated and extremely well informed.
Well, what I can say is, if I would compare things 20 years ago, or a bit more when I started working in the field in Palestine and in Jerusalem in particular, and now I can tell you that there's a huge difference from the people who are involved in art, from simply families, how they perceive somebody getting involved in the field. I can tell you that in the past, it was something that was unheard of, to become an artist or become a curator, somebody involved in art. It's like, where would you, how would you live? How would you, put food on the table if you're involved in this field? And it's true, there was nothing. There were no jobs. Actually, the word curator didn't exist at that time in Arabic. And now there's a big difference. Far more people are involved in art. Far more people go to art schools. There are actually three art academies in Palestine that kids can go to. But yet I have to, and I don't know the situation in Iran, but I have to basically say that you can see this phenomena more present in the center, if we're talking geographically, in the center of the country. So anywhere between Ramallah, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. If you go north or if you go south, there's far less exposure. Given, of course, the situation in Palestine, there's actually hardly any exposure to the outside world. It's a closed-off place. It's a place that is cut off. It's a place under occupation, and you have to you have to realize that, and you have to deal with that. So that's the basic thing. What gets in is little in comparison to other places, and I'm sure that in Iran there is a similar situation in terms of what is admissible and what's allowed to go in. But yet, given the fact that in rural areas you have less of an exposure, so you get less kids, even though the number, as you said at the beginning, the number of kids in the population are far greater now than, of course, the older generation. So there's far more younger population. Nonetheless, there are parts in the country where these kids are deprived of basic good education, and what they take is basic education. Unfortunately, it's not good enough. And we've seen, because of the ongoing conflict, because of the ongoing occupation and oppression, and the fragmentation of the country, the 300 plus checkpoints that you have, that riddle the whole country, the impossibility of movement, of learning, of seeing, of going to places. People are confined to very small pockets within their own, towns and villages. That has a toll on this population. So over the last 20 years or so, which is a generation, as you count, you can see that there's a decline, a serious decline in the level of the education, when we talk about art, when we talk about our projects, when we go and fundraise for our programs, when we want to try to build more schools and academies for that, we're always checking ourselves, thinking about those people who we cannot even reach. If I would want to do something in Gaza, it's impossible. No one from the West Bank or East Jerusalem can go to Gaza. It's impossible. No one from Gaza can go out to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. It is simply impossible. There are no permits for people to move from one side to another. So what do you do in this situation? Okay, there is the internet, there are these things, but it's different. If I would say what I would want to say in a written piece and send it to you, to each one of you, it's different from me sitting here and fielding your questions right here on the stage.
I was witness to 30 years ago around the corner at the Village Gate, a censorship moment with a famous American artist. They were broadcasting on the radio. It was an anniversary of the gate, and Art DeLogoff, who runs the gate, was there. And Oscar Brand was playing, and Allen Ginsberg was going to read some of his poetry that he's working on, which got Art a little nervous. So he starts reading, and at a certain point, he read a line that was obscene, and Art raised his voice, said, "Alan," and he sort of backed up a bit and read other lines of the fragmentation of the poetry. So in that sense, I had a feeling that his authenticity as a writer, he was going to read something that would break that boundary, but then he would agree with the format of the radio broadcast being public and along the reads. But it was quite a moment. You were wondering whether he would do anything, and he did.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Other question? Go ahead.
Hi, Shireen, thank you very much for your honesty about how artists from exile are benefiting from from this idea of being an exile. My question is actually to both of you. I'm Vanini Bellarmino, I'm a curator, and I had a chance to work in Israel and Palestine back in 2007. I was the lead producer for an EU project that wanted to open walls, wanted to open windows in the separation line. So a friend of mine suggested, since I don't know anything about the conflict, that I be the producer because I would be the neutral person. So we worked together with artists from Cyprus, former Greek and Cypriot, and then Belfast Catholic Protestant and former East-West Germany, together with Israeli and Palestinian photographers and researchers. So my question now is like, how do you avoid, or is it necessary to avoid being politicized or being political as an artist coming from that region? And I'm curious to know from John, what is your position in the boycott? Against the embargo about like not working with Israeli intellectuals, and yeah, to what extent does this help, like promote peace or conversation amongst artists? Thank you.
What did you think about the situation when you worked on the project? I'm curious because we have a lot of these people who fly in and fly out.
I wouldn't say I was the only person who was not from the conflict zone, and I think. Since yesterday, it has been resonating in my head. That's why I was waiting for you to come up and say.
But you didn't say anything.
Yeah, and I was like, I will never forget the moment, like when I first saw the wall, because it's 798 kilometers, 9 meters high, and my role was really to produce this like we wanted to occupy 60 meters of both sides in Israel and Palestine. We partnered with Al-Quds University in Palestine and in Israel with Van Leer Institute and the Jerusalem Film Festival. And it was, for me, really heartbreaking because I asked myself, first, do I really want to die for art? I don't know why I had that feeling, that because we were busing people from Jerusalem, mainly Israelis, to see the wall for themselves, that they have not seen, they don't want to see it. And also for me to be confronted with a lot of Palestinian artists. I usually was the only person that they look at in the eye because I was smuggling my colleague who's an Israeli. You can tell that she's Jewish from 200 meters, that nobody wanted to look at her. And I was getting all the screams from Palestinian artists telling me that, do you know what it's like to have M16 like flying over your head? And I thought like, no, so I'm still questioning the impact of this project that we did, but I wouldn't say that we just flew in and out. Most of the team members now, like another well-known Palestinian artist, Steve Sobel, now lives in Berlin. We kind of all moved to Berlin from this project and continue the conversation.
I totally forgot what your question was. Anyway, the most I would say the important thing for me is that. A lot of these projects come and go, not to say that they're not important, or not to say that the people behind them, like yourself and the people organizing, are coming with kind of all the right kind of goodwill gestures and trying to help and support and maybe alleviate the situation, but in fact. The things on the ground and the political context, which I wanted to comment on, because you asked twice, how do you separate politics? In those contexts, you cannot separate politics from daily life, from art, from what you eat, from what you say, who you are, what kind of identity card you carry, what kind of license plate on your car, etc. All of that, it's all kind of tangled up in one in a kind of form that you can never figure out. It's all tangled up. You can never take it apart. So all these events and goodwill gestures eventually fizzle away because the facts on the ground and what the Israeli government is doing by creating these facts on the ground, regardless of what kind of where we are in negotiations or not negotiations, and is actually kills all these with time. So a moment of good gesture, a project that somehow brings a group of Palestinian and Israeli artists together to talk or to do something together, all kind of dies away very quickly, and the situation on the ground, the facts, the ongoing oppression and occupation and humiliation and killing and all of that is, dominates and overshadows anything and everything. So with time, people started saying to themselves, what is the use of doing these things? I mean, if I would want to, if a Palestinian would want to work with an Israeli, what good would it make? What would it bring to the situation, since everything is going into the other direction? So the idea of boycott, divestment, and sanctions was not born just because somebody thought that we need to boycott the Israelis, or it's something that was born from the civil movement, something that was very much the case when it was the first Intifada. I'm talking about 1988, 1989, 1990. That time, the whole idea of boycotting Israel was born. At that time, when kids started going on the streets and throwing stones, that was only one aspect of the Intifada. The other kind of civil movement actions on the ground was that people started planting their gardens, their backyards, started creating these home schools, started working together in order to do whatever it takes to distance or to kind of cut their relations to Israel. Because they thought that, on one hand, yes, they're living under occupation, maybe earning some money by working as bricklayers or whatever, but at the same time, paying everything back without getting anything, paying everything back in taxes, paying everything back in buying all the essentials, all the products from milk to bread to everything that was coming from Israel, because Palestinians cannot control products and cannot import materials from the outside. So the movement started to kind of, let's boycott them, let's try to kind of cut this relationship. And that died with the peace negotiations and the Oslo Accords and everything, because people kind of for that decade thought or imagined that there might be a solution, there might be an end to the situation. But then since that didn't happen and that kind of completely collapsed, people went back to boycott. But now, the world has realized what's going on, so more people had started joining in from the outside, and that's where the BDS movement started gaining momentum.
The first part of the question was for Shireen, and the question was how you can actually regain and re-establish art, pure art, in a politically contaminated situation. Is there a chance or not at all?
I mean, I can't speak for other artists, and I can speak for myself that I found subconsciously I'm moving to less directly political work. I'm working on a feature-length film about an Egyptian singer, Kulthum, and I think by pursuing the life and art of a singer living through politically troubled time, it might give you a very interesting perspective. But at the same time, it's about female strength and about music. It's about a celebration of a culture of Egypt that was very sophisticated, cosmopolitan, contrary to the image that is depicted about Egypt. I find that humor and music and returning to this sort of forms of making work when you're expected to make the kind of more didactic one-liner work, it's probably recommended. And I feel that a lot of these, again, have grown in me subconsciously as a resistance. In fact, I've stopped making work that relates to Iran. And I felt not being there for so long, I'm not interested in, again, approaching it in a nostalgic fashion. And I want to be where I'm working, so I'm spending a lot of time in the Middle East. So I think different artists make their different decisions about, again, checking your own sense of integrity and honesty in terms of what are you trying to say, why should people pay attention to it, and do you really take a form of responsibility for the expression that you're putting out in the world? And then the rest is in others' hand, but I think it goes back to the artist.
It goes back to the artist. It's been a sobering discussion. Thank you, Shirin Neshat. Thank you, Jack Persekian. Do we still have time for one more question? Or okay, one more. Okay.
Thank you for having time for one more question. First, maybe a comment, Shirin. I really appreciate this sentiment, but it's all political at the end. I think I don't get this. I'm trying to understand what, the purity or the sensation of something pure and beyond the political, or criticizing, not, I think, on, there is some negative criticism that I hear, I don't know if I'm right, but of the people wanting to, write their memoirs at 25 or having some experiences which can qualify political or, difficult or whatever, and that it's the Western audience that somehow, at the end, is the filter that, and should bear responsibility of some kind. I don't think we necessarily always talk to the Western audience. We talk to an audience. I think the market is diverse in a way, the cultural market, where things perform. So it's, and yes, at the end, it's just, individual responsibility. I mean, as individuals, not necessarily artists have this specific kind of responsibility, in the field, in the, in the larger sort of cultural exchange field, like that their work is so special. It's been something, has, they're greater beings or something. So I think it's, I don't think it's, I think it's, there is a sentiment in the criticism, but I don't find it necessarily very productive somehow. But the second thing to Jack, and actually I had the privilege to work with Benji, a good friend of yours and a good artist. And I wanted to ask, how is the Palestinian Museum, or whatever it's called, how is that negotiated within the system, and how are you managing that, and how is that affected by all the somehow border politics, and how does it bridge it beyond, physically and somehow conceptually? Thanks.
Very short. Maybe in the next session I'll speak more about the Palestinian Museum. But in short, given the state of fragmentation, given the impossibility of people actually coming and accessing the museum that we're now building in Bir Zayt, in north of Ramallah, given the fact that 85%, I would say, or 80% of the Palestinian population, even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to. They're not permitted to come to the museum. So we created a system, or at least we draw the structure of this museum as a network rather than as a place. So the place, the hub, is in Bir Zayt, where we're going to be working, the few staff that are there. But we want to establish presence in different parts of the world, particularly in places where there are large Palestinian communities. And through these communities, we want to reach out to the world. So, of course, Jordan and Lebanon and Syria, but now Syria is temporarily out of the question. So Jordan and Lebanon are kind of the biggest concentrations. So we want to establish branches over there. Gaza is definitely another place, and we're thinking somewhere in Europe, most probably the UK, and I'll tell you more why the UK. And in the States, we're not sure where, but somewhere in the States, either here or on the West Coast, because we discovered that most of the Palestinian population in the States live on the West Coast now. And in Latin America, particularly in Chile, because there's a huge community over there. Some people say somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 people living over there. So this is our plan. The UK is special because we're registering the museum there as a UK charity, just to give us this protection, where what we're building in Palestine is a branch of this UK charity, even though it is a Palestinian museum, but it is going to be in exile as a organization structure. But just to kind of get that protection and get all. For example, our board is made up of rich Palestinians who have contributed financially to the building of this museum. They themselves cannot. They hold passports. Most of them hold passports from Arab countries. So some hold Kuwaiti passports, some hold Lebanese passports, Jordanian passports. And if we wanted to register something in Palestine, they wouldn't be able to be part of it because they're not allowed to come in. So this is why a UK-based charity. And the program itself, the way I'm working on developing the program, is also to kind of think about it as more of a program that engages these nodes or these satellites and work through the communities on particular themes and topics and things that are of interest to them and us at the same time, but not necessarily having the same thing happen in these different places, similarly. It could be things that are running in parallel. There could be a research project happening in Lebanon, an exhibition taking place in Santiago, Chile, documentation and archive in Ramallah, in Bir Zayt, and so on and so forth. So this is what we're actually working on. And the opening now is slated for mid-2016. And things look it's going to happen.
So this discussion going to continue in Shirin's work and Jack's planning of the museum. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Shirin, Ashad, Dr. Kassian, and the organizers.